programs we have lined up for you on SBS during this week of peace, I think it would be hard to find a more gripping study of human nature than what you'll see in Paradise Camp. This camp was the notorious Theresienstadt concentration camp, and the prisoners were forced to take part in an extraordinary and macabre Nazi hoax. The story of the camp, the hoax, and the human beings who lived there is told through the eyes of survivors who now live in Australia. They are living testimony to the resilience and victory of the human spirit. And for me, this program is the highlight of our week of peace. So here now is Paradise Camp.
Of all the Nazi crimes against humanity, the name of Theresienstadt stands alone. Today there is hardly a trace that this was once the strangest of all the concentration camps, and that it was used to spread the most monstrous lies of the war. You can feel this place has been forever desecrated. Now it is almost deserted. But at one time, 140,000 people passed through the gates of Theresienstadt. Of them, perhaps only hundreds are still alive. They witnessed the turning of a town into a grotesque showplace intended to fool the world. Edith Sheldon was only 15 when she was transported to the camp, and she was there from nearly the beginning to the end. What she and other survivors have brought with them to Australia is one of the most bizarre episodes of the Second World War. When the Nazis invaded Czechoslovakia, the task of solving the problem of the Czech Jews was given to one of Hitler's most ruthless henchmen, Reinhard Heydrich. In 1941, Heydrich hit upon the ploy of creating a camp that could be readily disguised, and for this purpose he chose the fortress town of Theresienstadt. It was situated close to Germany, and its small population could be easily relocated. Built in the 18th century to honor the Empress Maria Theresa, it was never used as a fortress and served only as a garrison town. But as a concentration camp, it suited Heydrich perfectly. It was completely walled in, it had huge barracks, and was surrounded by a moat. Nearby was the small fortress, which was already a Gestapo prison. Any troublemakers from the new camp could be sent there for punishment. From the very beginning, Theresienstadt was founded on lies. When the Czech Jews were evicted from their homes, they were told they would be protected there for the duration of the war. For the elderly, Theresienstadt would be a place of safety and comfort.
My mother was looking after old people, nursing old people, which was a job nobody wanted to do because it was just undescribable. Conditions the old people lived in, they had no sanitation and they couldn't get to the bathroom, so they had no food, they couldn't wash themselves, there wasn't enough staff to wash them, and the stench was just unbelievable.
When the unsuspecting German Jews were rounded up, they were promised a resort town with private apartments, parks and gardens. Many believed that Theresienstadt was to be their reward for loyal service to Germany in the First World War.
They were very well dressed, they had nice coats, they brought pictures, some of them had nice pictures and wanted to make their beautiful spa stay very nice, so they thought they will do it all. And when they arrived into these big barracks with about 100 people in one big room, So they just couldn't understand what happened. They were asking, where is our beautiful accommodation? And everybody had to tell them, it's nothing like that in Theresienstadt.
Those veterans from World War I, they were all enthusiastic Germans. And they were promised that they are transferred to an old people's home and settlement. And I remember one scene when I was approached by one of those veterans with a wooden leg, and he asked me, could you tell me where Beach Road is? And I told him, there is no beach road here. Why do you ask? We haven't got a beach. And he said, because I have a contract for a house which I bought in Beach Road.
Particularly people who had come from good backgrounds, wealthier backgrounds, arriving in these casernes or barracks with no beds, no nothing, it was very bad weather and so on, where they were so desperate that some of them just went straight to the windows. They were on the second floor and just jumped. And it just looked so hopeless that you wouldn't be surprised if most of us hadn't committed suicide.
Yeah, when I arrived there, so we got just the space of a suitcase and not an inch on both sides more. And this way you could sleep, sit, or read, or whatever you did. This was for 2 years. Exactly 2 years I had this space for my own.
But the Theresienstadt the Nazis didn't want the world to see was portrayed at great risk by a group of gifted artists who secretly painted everything they saw.
It was the impression of the place, the impact of the place. You know, we were suddenly transferred from a middle-class life into slum life. And figures around me, I just wanted to preserve the whole picture. I tried first to get a camera, but it wasn't possible. And then I saw a friend sketching the scene, an architect. So I thought I should try it myself. I never had tried it before. I never went sketching before. So the only way to get sketching material was to get it from outside at that time. So I wrote an illegal letter with the help of a gendarme. I wrote an illegal letter to my fiancée who was back in our hometown, and I asked her, I remember exactly, for a sketchbook, for a pencil and for an eraser. And I really got it. And so that was the way how I started to sketch.
There was an epidemic of typhoid earlier in 42, 43, which took a lot of children and young people. And the old people had nobody to look after them, so they got lice. And, it was very sad, really. And was very little food. You could see the old people scraping away at sort of the barrels where the soup was served from. I think they were the worst off, really, because the old people only got the basic ration, which was very, very meager. Breakfast was a ersatz coffee, which we didn't bother because by the time you queued up, you lost so many calories just standing there queuing up that it wasn't worth queuing up for it. And you got, there were special longish loaves of bread, and you got a quarter loaf every 3 or 4 days, I forget, I think twice twice a week you got a quarter loaf of bread.
The main thing is we look forward to the bread. That was our staple food. And this bread was just non-existent after a day or two. Some people couldn't wait to keep it for 2 days. They just swallowed it practically the first day when they got it. And actually, this is what happened with my good teeth at the end, that after a very short time, I broke them because it was just so bad and stale.
We got potatoes, which looked everything except potatoes, with the sauce, which was lilac, mauvish, rotten. And once a week we had a tiny piece of meat, which was horse meat, which was uneatable, sweet, hard, uncooked. And I haven't seen vegetables for 4.5 years and fruit whatsoever. It didn't enter the camp. It didn't exist.
A friend of ours who worked in the kitchen stole a couple of potatoes. And so we bought this paprika, which was crushed red brick, paprika substitute, and caraway seed substitute, which was crushed bark, tree bark. And my friend, another friend who stole an onion from the field, my friend made a goulash out of it. It was probably the best goulash I ever ate.
To complete the illusion of a normal town, the Nazis ordered the setting up of a council of Jewish elders. The council made improvements, but its very existence allowed the Nazis to claim that Theresienstadt was self-ruling, with its own leaders and its own police.
I worked night shift with the police force there. 1 woman, 1 man, just watching old people going to the toilets or if anybody gets sick. The lavatory was just a piece of wood. And I went with my sister-in-law and she slipped with 1 foot and she dropped right into it, plus her teeth and everything, and I had to get her out, which was beautiful. Night to remember. Now we can laugh. If we could, we pulled them out, but sometimes you couldn't. And it was so full, you just couldn't. They just stayed there.
The plan for Theresienstadt worked so well that a multitude of people from all over occupied Europe arrived, even those who were only part Jewish.
What they had left really were people who didn't even know that they had Jewish ancestors, yet they found them in some way back in their family tree. They were a Jew, and so they were sent to Theresienstadt, which was considered a preferential camp. And they arrived there and they were absolutely bewildered to live in this Jewish community now when they never even knew that they had some Jewish blood in their veins.
I met a Jewish boy when I was 16, and there was a group of women, mostly non-Jewish women, who had Jewish boyfriends, and they went there as messengers to smuggle food, money, and messages in and out. And at night, when it was dark, I went to the meeting place, which most of the time was a big barn. And I remember it was totally dark, and I was scared, and I knocked at the gate. And then my boyfriend opened up, and I went inside. And then we exchanged, I handed over the goods that I brought, and he told me what's going on. And I took back again little notes from people, from guys who had their girlfriends and parents in Prague. And I did that 9 times before he was caught, with the money and the messages and the whole luggage by, it was sort of a Czech country policeman. And he is being locked up. he was a very sporty, very intelligent, a well-educated man. He was into electronics and into photography, and he was my first love. I was very much in love with him. He opened a totally new world for me. And so I had everybody there and all my friends. So I had this unusual idea that I thought I want to be there too. So I went to the some Jewish, I don't know what it was called, and I said, you know, how about it? And they said, well, you can't go because you are on your birth certificate a Protestant, you know. That's out. And so I found a way that I had to become a Jew. I mean, it's not a religious thing for me. It was just the idea of being there with everybody. And I had to have lessons, and I had to go to what is called mikveh. It's sort of a Jewish bath, like a Christianing thing in Jewish. And then I went and told them, okay, now I'm Jewish, now deport me. And on the 19th of May, 1943, I was deported to Theresienstadt.
Life in the camp was like a nightmare, an absurd bureaucratic nightmare. Everyone was entered in at least 17 different files. Yet nothing was certain, only the Nazi rules and ridiculous prohibitions, and even they were changed at whim. People weren't allowed to sing or whistle in the streets. No one was allowed to touch a chimney sweep for luck. Abortions were compulsory, but smoking was regarded as a serious crime.
As I quite was a smoker before, I didn't want to miss out there too. So we got tea leaves. I rolled the tea leaves in newspapers or any piece of papers that didn't make any difference, and was sitting in the morgue, and this was the only place where the German never, ever entered. And there I was sitting and smoking in peace. But if I would have been caught, they would hang me.
Religious life went on regardless. But truly amazing was the emergence of an extraordinary culture. Theresienstadt had some of Europe's finest actors, composers and musicians, and they created plays and operas. It was done with nothing, but reached out to everyone. For an hour or so, people could forget.
I remember seeing Carmen and Aida, but in particular we saw a Czech children's opera, and I've made the costumes for the children, and the whole thing was absolutely fabulous. And I also remember that the SS was in the audience, and I couldn't help but clapping, because it was absolutely fabulous.
The only thing I still see in my mind is the main figure, which was a little boy, fantastic actor, with a little mustache, looking like Hitler, acting like Hitler, but like the crazy Hitler. So he absolutely ridiculed Hitler, and they ridiculed the system, how they could perform it, how they dared to perform it, and how they got away with it. It's still a puzzle for me.
Despite all their promises, the Nazis never intended Theresienstadt to be a place of final destination. and within a year there were regular deportations. Then in May 1942, Heydrich was assassinated in Prague. His departure set the stage for the entrance of Adolf Eichmann, an ambitious young SS officer and self-appointed expert in Jewish affairs. He began taking a personal interest in Theresienstadt and ordered a massive speeding up of transports out of the camp. At one stroke, the whole purpose of the camp became clear. Theresienstadt was just a transit camp, and there was now the terrifying reality of families being separated and of being sent somewhere further on.
We had absolutely no idea where all those people went. People were loaded on the trains. They were permitted to have, I think, 50 kilos of luggage. And we were told they'll go to Germany to work.
They were told that they're going to go to another ghetto, to the east.
Transports came and transport went, but only at night. So 3 or 4 o'clock at night, the door was open and one of the SS or SA, whoever was there, just asked number. We have been numbers, we haven't been names. Number so-and-so, be in the morning and this time, ready to be transported.
The whole city was like, you could feel it. The whole air was shivering because everybody was so nervous and waiting for the transport because nobody knew who will be in it.
Normally they always had 1,000 people went in a transport, and they usually called up 1,200, 200 reserve. And the selections were made. One day they took all the solicitors and their families, and one day they might take all the people who had tuberculosis, and one day they might take all the people from the middle of the alphabet, and next day they would take people over 60, and next day people between 50 and 55. It was just a very random selection.
In 1943, my whole family, that was my father, my brother, my mother and grandmother, we were transported to Auschwitz. I was 13 years old then. We were shipped to Birkenau, and we were put into a place called actually a family lager, which was actually very unusual because most of the places in Auschwitz were separate women and separate men. And this particular one was called the family camp.
The camp where we were in Birkenau was a special camp. The ways of the Nazis were different, you can't explain it. So this camp held people from Theresienstadt who came there and didn't go straight into the gas chambers, but had the destination on their march papers, 6 months special treatment. And we knew from the beginning that it means 6 months staying in the camp and dying after 6 months.
They took everything what we had, even our little knife or little comb or whatever we had, everything was taken away. The only thing we were left was the clothes we arrived in, and we were issued a little round bowl and a spoon, and that was all. We didn't own anything at all anymore. We had no name. We had only a number. We were not referred to as actually human beings, but just numbers.
But the people sent to the family camp had one more role to play. They were forced to write glowing postcards to relatives in Theresienstadt, saying how well they were being treated and how little there was to fear in Auschwitz. Thousands of prisoners were then ordered to post-date their cards, and a few days later, they were sent to their death. When their relatives in Theresienstadt received these cards months later, they were deceived into believing that Auschwitz wasn't such a bad place and that the writers of the postcards were still alive.
Actually, we lived in Birkenau for 8 months. Lived is a very difficult word to say, lived, because you existed. Unfortunately, where the camp was situated, we could see the chimneys, and we could see the railway, and we could see daily all the transports coming in, just disappearing. Of course, once you lived there for 8 months, you know what's going on. You knew exactly what was happening. We lived in the fear, when is our turn? Well, as it happened, I don't know why it took that long before they dissolved the camp. They dissolved the camp and took the strongest people out, and we were told, I mean not told, but we heard rumors that the people will be sent to work. That was the last time I've seen my father, because they took him away, which we didn't know where, and they separated my little brother and my grandmother, and me and my mother, we were sent at that time with hundreds of other people to the main camp of Auschwitz, where we didn't know what's going to happen to us. As it turned out, we were there for a few days, and I don't know what happened with us. We somehow got separated from the normal group, and we were hoarded with, I can't remember, maybe another 50, 60 people. And actually, we went to the gas chambers. Well, we went inside, but we knew rumors actually what they looked like, and it was exactly like it. They looked like showers. Everybody was quiet. People were all so terrified that they couldn't even scream. We got in there, and miracles happened. That day, something went wrong with the equipment, and we were again sent back to the block. And that was a miracle how I am here today, and my mother too.
In Theresienstadt, the men were put to work extending the railway line right into the camp. Transports would now arrive and leave every few days, and the population was constantly changing. No one was safe from deportation.
My mother was then, towards the end in October, 44 conscripted into the transport, and I went to the head of the gardening section, Mr. Kursavi, and begged him to be released so that I could go with my mother. And he knew my family. And he said, I told him who I was, and he said, I'm not releasing you, and you'll be very thankful to me later on. So I tried to get into the transport, go with my mother, but in the end my mother didn't go. She was in the reserve, and I stayed behind also. Only our luggage went, our blankets, which we were very sorry about because we were very cold.
In the middle of the night, I've been called in the transport with 5,000 other peoples, and we have been all in one place in one of the barracks, and they're called out every single number except mine. The luggage in the meantime left already to Auschwitz, and in the last moment, just between the train and the door from the barracks, they called me out. I have to stay behind. This never ever happened before, and it was a miracle I'm here.
All the sanitary personnel were protected for most of the time. And then I worked in the agriculture, and the people on the top of the list in each group were protected. If you slacked in your work, you got to the bottom of the list. If you worked very hard, and if you were healthy enough, you remained at the top of the list.
Well, I saw that I don't get anywhere being in Theresienstadt, so eventually I tried to get further on still in my search to find out what happened to my boyfriend, whom I called Goldie. And so I went to the office there, and I said that I want, you know, to be transported for work or whatever, to get out of Theresienstadt. And I was eventually in September 44, I was in a transport, and we came to this horrible place where it said Arbeit macht frei, Auschwitz. And somehow, you know, with the electric wires, we knew that we have come to sort of something like a concentration camp. And we were herded out of the trains and put into fives. I don't know, there were 1,000 people, maybe more. And then we had to walk past a table where a very good-looking man stood with very polished boots, and he wore gloves, and he made right, left, which we also did not know what it meant, but afterwards, of course, I found out that all the women and children went to one side, and I, with all the people capable to do work, went to the other. And later on, I saw pictures of Mengele, and I knew it was Mengele who was sorting us.
We had to go for a selection in front of Dr. Mengele. Dr. Mengele was standing here. We had to all strip, and we had to march naked in front of him. And he said either left or right. Well, by looking at the situation, we could sort of quickly summarize what was going on, because to the right went the people who looked a bit stronger and didn't look sick, and to the left went the older people, the younger people. But we had no choice. We just had to march in front of him and wait for our fate. As it happened, my mother went in front of me, and she was sent to the right. Well, in that moment, I knew, well, that is all right. Mummy's been picked to go to work. Another miracle happened. Another SS came and talked to Dr. Mengele. Dr. Mengele turned, and in that split second, I said, well, what can happen to me now? I ran to my mother. If he turns back, I'll either be there and he won't see me. So I took the chance. I ran quickly to the right, and I hid behind my mother. And when Dr. Mengele looked back at all the other women there, I wasn't there. It was the next woman's turn. So I was safely hiding behind my mother and another prisoner, and that's the way I got out of Auschwitz.
There were some people who were protected from the transports that were the people who at the time were in the Judenrat, the governing sort of body, but that also was subject to change. And then the whole lot were sent with their family and all the people, all the hangers-on. And that first there were Czechs, and then there were Germans, and then there were Austrians in the end. So there were 3 changes of government, sort of Jewish government in the camp. And these people were protected for a time, but not forever.
But there's always been the question in many minds, how much did the Ältestenrat, or Council of Jewish Elders, really know about the fate of the transports and about Auschwitz?
Well, a fellow called Lederer escaped from Auschwitz and wrote to a girlfriend of one inmate, a friend of his in Theresienstadt, a letter. I happened to smuggle the letter in to Theresienstadt and gave it unread to the recipient of the letter. About an hour later, he and another friend of his came to tell me the contents, and they were really alarming. We learned for the first time about gas chambers and about all the horrors of Birkenau, or Auschwitz, if you want to call it. And we went to consult the Ältestenrat what to do about it. They told us that they already knew of the horrors of Auschwitz because it was smuggled through in a sardine, box of sardines, and warned us not to tell anything to anybody about it.
I don't know how much they knew, but even if they would have heard, you have to put yourself in their position. They couldn't believe it, even if somebody came to tell them the story.
They just couldn't believe it or didn't want to believe it. What was really going on in the gas chambers.
Those who did know about Auschwitz have often been asked, why didn't they resist? Why didn't they take up arms?
Theresienstadt was now Warsaw. In Warsaw, they had possibilities. They had outside help, the possibilities to make their own arms, to defend themselves. That was not possible in Theresienstadt.
The growing rumors about death camps led the International Red Cross to request an inspection of Auschwitz. Eichmann kept delaying, but they grew more insistent, and finally he came up with a proposal more to his liking. Why not visit Theresienstadt, which he claimed was exactly like other concentration camps, only a little more luxurious. But Eichmann needed time to prepare the camp, and that was the start of the grandest scheme of all, the Great Beautification.
I was given a job of cleaning the pavements, the joints between the bricks, with a toothbrush. The Germans decided the dormitories looked too crowded with 3 tiers of bunks, so the top tier was cut off, and as a consequence, 1/3 of the people, or roughly that, were sent to Auschwitz to make the place less crowded. And the sidewalks were scrubbed, and the houses where the commission was going to walk were painted, nothing behind, but just there. And all of a sudden shops appeared, and all the things that were plundered out of our suitcases were being offered for sale for ghetto money. They had banks with fake money, they have shops with fake things in it. Everything was fake. It was a make-believe word, a crazy make-believe word for the Swiss Commission to see.
Worthless bank books were issued, and the Nazis worked overtime producing false documentation to prove their good intentions. Thousands of prisoners were ordered to make the camp look beautiful for the big day, the 23rd of June, 1944.
Where I was staying at the time, downstairs they established a post office, and when the commission arrived, they were handing, certain people were called upon to receive parcels, and the commission saw them receiving the parcels. What they did not see, that around the corner the Germans took the parcels off them again and redistributed the same parcels to the next lot of people. Also, a pavilion was built for the children, who I think numbered 14 at the time, and beds were specially made, short, I think 5 foot or whatever they were, and we were each issued a glass with toothbrush and toothpaste, which we were of course not allowed to touch. And we had to sleep in those little tiny beds because we were about 16, 17 at the time, but there were no children, so we had to pretend to be children. We had to get undressed in the cellar so we shouldn't bring the smell of manure or what have you up to the room, because the pretense was that we were at school all day, and that's why we weren't there when the commission arrived.
There was a pavilion built where musicians happened to be practicing merry tunes just for the time when the Red Cross came. Of course, Theresienstadt was full of people. There were over 45,000 people there. And every room was packed. But as it so happened, just one room was set aside where the visitors would so-called accidentally happen to inspect. and that room had only 2 beds instead of usual 14 to 16 beds. And the visitors, by pure coincidence, selected just that house and just that room to see how nice the Jews really lived.
The Red Cross inspection lasted only 5 hours and 40 minutes, and what they saw was exactly what the Nazis wanted them to see. Fantastic lies were told that day.
When the commission arrived, we had to go out into the fields in freshly washed and pressed clothes, singing happily in formation Czech national songs which were forbidden before.
They prepared like 2 places, like coffee shops, and it was all staged. And by the time the commission went to the first one, I was working there sort of as a waitress, just for the time being. And then we had to run quickly, the girls, you know, who looked nice and were nicely dressed up, for that to run to the second one before the commission again came, so that it was just all like in the movies.
Somebody tried to sort of make contact with the commission, but it was impossible. They were just too closely guarded, and they just didn't see it was sham. People tried to draw their attention to it, but it just didn't work.
The Red Cross inspectors were completely fooled by the facade created for their benefit. When the Swiss delegate, Dr. Rossel, made his report, he said, "Immediately on entering the ghetto, we were convinced that its population did not suffer from undernourishment. Certainly there are few populations whose health is as carefully looked after as in Theresienstadt." The smarter women were all wearing silk stockings and hats and carried modern handbags. The young men also seemed well turned out. Some of them were even flashily dressed. We found that the ghetto was a community leading an almost normal existence. It was such a total success that the Nazis in Berlin decided to capitalize on the hoax by making a film.
In den Schrebergärten der Familien gibt es ständig zu jäten und zu gießen, wächst jedoch ein willkommener Zuschuss für den Küchenzettel.
Only the healthiest were chosen. The actors were fed extra rations and ordered to perform in situations they had never encountered before. Many of the scenes weren't even filmed in Theresienstadt.
Eine kleine Barackenstadt ist das Arbeitszentrum.
Only a damaged fragment of the film survived the war. But as a piece of propaganda, it is so convincing that even today it still has the power to fool people. The SS men who concocted this sham called it "Hitler gives a town to the Jews."
Wenn der Arbeitstag endet und der Feierabend beginnt, strömen aus den verschiedenen Vorwerken und Arbeitsbaracken die Arbeiter und Arbeiterinnen wieder in die Stadt zurück. Sportveranstaltung in Theresienstadt zum Fußballwettspiel. Um die Zuschauermenge fassen zu können, findet das Wettspiel immer auf dem Hof einer früheren Kaserne statt. Wegen des etwas beschränkten Spielraumes sind die beiden Mannschaften nur je 7 Mann stark. Die reich ausgestattete Zentralbücherei enthält neben schöngeistiger auch reichhaltige wissenschaftliche Literatur und wird den verschiedensten Ansprüchen gerecht.
Transport stopped during the filming, a temporary reprieve. But for Otto Pan, now living in Melbourne, it must have been a very strange experience.
They put the camera onto me, and I was a principal of this bookkeeping office, and it was, of course, all a hoax. I realized that when they finished filming, it was all, they took all the books away again, and it was like it was before.
Alleinstehende Frauen und Mädchen machen es sich in ihrem Traumheim gemütlich.
The unfortunate stars of this film had now become inconvenient witnesses. As soon as their brief roles had ended, they were thanked by the Nazis, rewarded with extra food, and then most of them were sent to Auschwitz.
The hoax was shown in the film, where they showed Theresienstadt, what actually was a very bad concentration camp. They show as a Jewish settlement where people could live contentedly, but the hypocrisy in showing a film which they wanted to show to a gullible world who would have accepted it gladly because they would have had an excuse that they don't have to interfere, the Jews are all right, we don't have to bomb Auschwitz. The hypocrisy behind it was that by showing those people, like the old people knitting, and mainly the young people learning the trade, and the Nazis then knew exactly that those people are doomed to die, that they could the same day or the next day be deported to Auschwitz and will be deported for sure, latest in 1, 2, 3 months. That, in my view, is the horror about the film.
I had a friend with whom I shared everything we had, and at one stage I really wanted to finish it all because I was so hungry. I didn't want to live any longer, and she gave me wanted to give me her ration because she said that she works in the office and I pull a cart instead of a horse, that my job is much more strenuous than hers. Now, she was as hungry as I was, but she was going to give me her ration to pull me through this depression of wanting to finish it all. So that is real friendship. And you can learn about that only in a situation like that.
By early 1945, both the Americans and the Russians were advancing into Czechoslovakia. For the people of Theresienstadt, it then became a race against time. Only 15,000 remained, and the Nazis had by now decided their fate.
The Germans conceived of a plan of blocking off a moat and flooding it with water and possibly drowning us all there. We didn't quite know what was happening, but we knew that something was cooking, and we tried to sabotage it as much as possible. We mixed the mortar wrongly and put things down wrongly, and it had to be unpicked again, undone, and we knew that it was a matter of life and death for us to delay it as much as possible. And we did. And then at one stage there was rumor that they were going to gas us inside the casemates. And something was being built there, but we didn't also know quite exactly what the plans were. The Germans changed their ideas, but we tried to delay it as much as possible. Then they started burning the documents. We realized what was happening when we saw little pieces of paper, documents coming, floating. The statistics, they kept very precise statistics on who came in and who went out. The numbers, the names, occupations we had, they always had precise statistics on everything, and so all these statistics were being burned to destroy any evidence of how many people they sent to their death.
Well, I had a friend who worked at the elder's office, so she had pretty reliable news what's going on, and we knew that the end was very near. She read the papers, heard the news, and there was a false alarm that the liberating army is at the gates, and many people rushed to the gates, and 8 prisoners were shot dead.
Finally, the day of liberation came when the Russians entered Theresienstadt on the 9th of May, 1945. But even then it wasn't over. There was yet another ordeal to face.
The typhus came in several waves, and the people who got it first they were the biggest casualties, and then later on somehow the potency declined and it wasn't quite as bad. And I got pneumonia with it, and I lost my hair started falling out, and I thought if I survive, I finish my life without hair, so I was very worried about it. And just came out in handfuls in the morning. There was just handfuls lying there.
Then it was time to leave in search of homes and families. For most, there was nothing. Families had been decimated. Whole communities had disappeared. The children of Theresienstadt were never given a chance to tell their own story. Of the 15,000 children who entered the camp, only 100 survived the war. Only their drawings remain.
There has been very little done to find out the truth about Theresienstadt, because who once was there, as I, nearly 5 years, now it was a horror camp. All right, we didn't have a gas chamber, but you can live in horror without gas chambers as well.
Theresienstadt, in spite of all deceit, for me, as I see it today, was nothing else than the paddock in front of the slaughterhouse, which was away 300, 400 kilometers.
Well, after the war, I mean, I was not successful with my own journey, so after the war, eventually, I found out from somebody that Goldie jumped the train to get away before, obviously, it went to Lodz, that train, and that he was shot in the back by the Germans, and so he was long, long dead before I even, came to Theresienstadt myself.
Yes, well, it is many years ago, and the whole thing seems like it happened to me in another life. It's unreal, really.
For me, that was the saddest thing that, that through my interference, and I still have this awful guilt that I caused his death, because I don't believe that if I wouldn't have gone there, visiting that he would be dead now, because he would have lasted till 44 at Theresienstadt. And I always was hoping that somehow, by being involved myself, that maybe I can swap lives, so that eventually he will come back, because I didn't care if I didn't come back.